So I just want to start by introducing Jared Bothwell. He works for PublicVoice, got the title director, and PublicVoice is, I believe, based in New Zealand. Is that correct, Jared?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So, Jared, I'll just give you a few seconds to maybe explain a little about yourself and about PublicVoice, maybe how long you've worked there or something like that, and then we'll set up for you in order to do a short presentation. While we're doing a presentation, please feel free, if you have any questions, to ask questions of Jared, and at the end of the presentation, we'll start talking about some of those questions, and I'm sure Jared will be keen to answer them. So handing over to you, Jared.
Great. Hey, thanks very much, Joanne. So, yep, PublicVoice is a company which I started back in 2006 now. So we've been in operation for just over 10 years, and we specialise in digital engagement and public consultation. And one of the core services that we provide is a citizens panel service, which we provide through to a number of councils in New Zealand, actually a number being 6 in particular, or 6 to be specific. And it's the citizens panel service, which I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm just going to cover up a whole range of things, which would be including what a citizens panel is, why a council would want such a thing as a citizens panel, and then we can also look at some of the learnings that we've had in setting up and running panels for councils as well. So I've got a wee slideshow, and I can run through that, Joanne.
Oh, that's so cute, a wee slideshow. It sounds so much like New Zealand. I'll just, Jared, I've just given you presentation rights, so please feel free to start sharing your slideshow.
Great, thanks, Joanne. Beautiful. Now, with the magic of technology, you should now be able to see both my slideshow and hear my voice. Is that correct, Joanne?
That is correct.
Fantastic. So we're on board with the technology. So I'll scoot through this. Here we go. So the current clients that we're currently running our panels for are 6 councils within New Zealand. That's Hastings District Council, Wellington City Council, Tararua District Council, Thomasinall City Council, Hutt City Council, and Manawatu 2 District Council. Thomasinall City Council would be our oldest client. We started running the Citizens Panel back in 2008. I'm going to talk about what a citizen panel is. So it's pretty simple, really. What we do is we recruit a representative sample which mirrors the community of whatever the community that we're facing or we're dealing with. Those people that decide to join the panel then participate in regular online surveys, and they answer them via email invitation. And we find that when we do our surveys, that participation is high, as respondents are provided with an easy way to help shape their city's future. So we use a particular software platform which we use to manage our panels, and it includes a database. So we have a database of contacts, and then we're able to send an email out, people do a survey, and then we're able to send out reminders to those people as well. So the concept of a panel is really quite simple, but what we've found is that it's really quite effective as well. So the reason why a council would have a citizens panel is mainly because a council has lots of frustrations when they're trying to go out and do consultation with their clients. So they found that traditional methods of communication are not effective. So if you look at the traditional methods of consultation that we use in New Zealand, that would be putting a public notice in the newspaper, distributing a bunch of consultation forms, and advising the public of a consultation, and then maybe having people write a letter or putting a formal submission, through that traditional formal submission process. Often a council might look at looking at a research provider, and then they would, but there's some restrictions on that, and mainly because of the high cost of doing research. Ideally, I think most councils would actually do market research all the time. They're going to conduct a full census, but mainly because of the resources which are involved in doing the market research activity means that it just becomes unaffordable. When we're working with councils, they often complain about having low participation rates when consultation activities have been undertaken. And if they do consultation, they're always hearing from the same old people. I get called all sorts of things. It's squeaky wheels, And this they're hearing from the same people, and those people are generally bringing with them strong opinions. So they're either for or against the issue or the topic or the subject, which whatever the council is actually consulting on. And they're also called the vocal minority as well. So frequently there's a vocal minority which dominates that consultation process. And also drown out what's called the silent majority. I always thought the silent majority was quite a neat term until I think there was a whole bunch of supporters at a Donald Trump campaign recently yelling out, "We are the silent majority." So I'm not sure about the term silent majority anymore. I thought it was quite funny. I don't know what it's like in Australia. But Donald Trump is seen, I guess, as an outlier really, and I guess a lot of the supporters are as well. But regardless, I mean, there is a silent majority that does exist. And more often than not, when councils are going through these consultation processes, they're not hearing from the majority of people. And so they tend to have a skewed view in terms of the feedback that's coming through. And this is exactly why a council would have a panel, because it provides a council with a representative sample of the thoughts and opinions that lie within the community, and it provides a viable alternative to traditional methods of community consultation. And there was some research done back in 2010 by Anne Sharp and Catherine Anderson. They wrote a paper about online citizens panels as an advance in research and consultation. And it's well worth having a look at that paper as well, because it takes a more academic approach into how citizens panels have been used and to what effect as well. But we see the panels offering key benefits. Firstly, they access that silent majority, which I talked about, enables councils to increase public engagement. And you can also access the hard to reach, which includes farmers standing out in fields with laptops. And it provides a faster and more cost-effective methodology than traditional consultation techniques. So you're running a survey, and as soon as you open the survey up, I mean, we started a survey just the other day. It's been out in the field for I think 1 day. We've already received 250 responses to the local council's annual plan, and and they're able to access that through the live reporting functionality as well. So there's a lot of value that it provides through to councils there. But we've also had instances where the panel's been used by other community stakeholders as well. So we've got examples of councils where, for instance, I think we had one with Thomasinall City Council. They had an airport development, and we've also done it recently with Wellington City Council as well. We're looking at extending the runway at the Wellington City Airport. So the council's able to then use the panel with other community stakeholders and conduct research on behalf as well. So we've also used it within the health sector as well. And I guess one of the key benefits of the panel is that it's easy to use and resource. It's a simple concept. There's not a lot of resource which is required, and it can be run both internally within a council or depending on how you're resourced internally, maybe something that you may want to look at having a external research firm to manage for you as well. So I'm just going to run through a few case studies. These are examples where we've used the panel. So Hastings District Council, they were suffering from all those issues in terms of consultation that I was talking about before, and the fact that they weren't hearing from that silent majority. They've implemented the citizens panel. We went out and we recruited over 1,000 participants to join the panel. And when we do the recruitment, which I'll probably talk a little bit more in detail later, what we're building there is we're building a representative sample. So that would be young and old, a variety of geographic demographics data, which we're using then to ensure that the panel itself is representative. And what they've done with the panel that we're running for Hastings District Council as well, most of the time when we're doing the consultation, people participating in the surveys, at the end of the survey or at the completion of the survey, panel members have the option of going through to the Hastings My Voice, My Choice website, and they can then use that as an opportunity to discuss the topic further. So that's like an online forum type environment there. So I guess what we find when we're running the panels is that people are generally more willing to complete a survey than they are willing to go online and actually enter in discussions. A certain percentage of people, of course, are more than willing to go online and debate the issues and enter into that deliberative process. But I guess a survey is a far simpler and a far safer environment often as well. Thomasinall City Council, that was our first panel client. We've been running the panel since 2008, and we've had a fantastic sort of response rate to some of the surveys there. Often the response rates have been up to 86%, and those survey response rates are generally based on, well, it really depends on the issue that we're dealing with. Some issues are more interesting than other issues, and some are just of interest to the general community, and particularly controversial topics as well will generate a higher response rate. And as it says there on that particular slide, Andrew Boyle, the panel's provided a really useful way to get feedback from to the council on a wide range of topics. Wellington City Council, we manage their capital views panel. We won this in a slightly different methodology, because Wellington City Council actually has a fairly large research team of their own. So in that sense, when we're working with Wellington City Council, their research team actually goes and builds and develops the surveys. And the role that PublicVoice has played in this particular process is that we manage all the recruitment as well. And the recruitment of the panels, as I'll go into a little bit of detail later on, is probably the key element of the success of the panel. Because in regards to your recruitment, if you're just going to recruit if your recruitment or your sample is not representative, then the results of your surveys are not going to be representative either. And often that recruitment means that you need to over-recruit in certain areas. And typically that's younger age groups and some ethnic groups as well. And so I'm going to run through now some tips and get some learnings, and if I was to share with you, I guess, in regards to some ideas on how to set up a panel, and also some tips on how to run a successful panel as well. So as I talked about before, panel recruitment is probably the key stage in the process, and key considerations of the panel size. So more often than not, when we're running surveys, our panels range from, the smallest one would be around 1,000 people, and the largest panel that we have of randomly selected sample people, is about 2,800. Generally, the response rates to the surveys that we're running, we are in between, depending on the topic, they can be as low as probably 40% through to as high as about 85%. When we first started running our panels, we did telephone recruitment only, because it was the cheapest and most efficient way. That's now become problematic, essentially, because telephone recruitment's really useful and it's successful for recruiting. I mean, generally members of the public who are aged 40 plus. But what we were finding if we stuck to a solely telephone recruitment methodology was that we weren't getting younger members of the community. So what we then started doing is what we call street recruitment or intercept recruitment. This is when we actually have recruiters out in the public and identifying, generally younger members of the community, and then approaching them, explaining what the panel's all about, and getting them to join. And then, so originally when we first did our panel, it was purely it was a randomly selected sample. We also now have, most of our panels are now using a self-selected sample as well. So what that means is that you can create a panel which has both a randomly selected sample and a self-selected sample. Self-selected meaning that you may have a form on your website, or you may have some other internal databases that exist within council of people that have said, hey, we want to stay in contact, we'd like to hear about things. And so we can incorporate that, and that just builds the overall size of the panel. When we're doing our reporting of our survey results, we generally divide them by, we look at the total responses, and we also break them down or filter them down by random versus self-selected sample as well. Generally, there's no difference in the responses or in terms of the feedback or the responses to particular questions, but it acts as it just enables us to ensure that there's no bias in the results. When we're doing recruitment, we generally have sort of public recruitment campaigns. So we're raising public awareness of the panel and communicating through local media and what have you, what the panel's all about, and just increasing the publicity as well. So also when we're doing our recruitment, we often have incentives, and that's along the lines of, if we can have a prize draw. Generally it's a prize draw, maybe a high profile prize. So incentives are run when we're doing the recruitment of the panels, but we also have incentives for people to participate in the surveys as well. In regards to the next stage, is we're looking around survey development, deployment and reporting. So as I said, invitations are generally sent by email. We send out email reminders, which are sent out to non-respondents. We also provide live online reporting, which enables the ability to view survey results 24/7. And we generally share that to the survey respondents as well. So as a member of the public, if you're completing a survey, not only do you get the chance to go into maybe a small prize draw, but you would also have the ability to, once you complete the survey, to view the response, to view actually the live results of that survey as well. We get a lot of people coming back to us saying, hey, that's a great idea. I like the ability to, once I see the survey, once I complete the survey, to actually see what other people think about that particular topic as well. We use responsive survey templates as well, so that means that the surveys can be completed on mobile devices or iPads, mobile phones, etc. And then in regards to panel engagement, some recommendations around that was that we keep this, is that you complete surveys regularly, so every couple of months. We don't want to be having too many surveys, but we also don't want to be having too few surveys. And probably the key rule of thumb I talk about when we're actually working with councils is to keep the surveys short. My preference is for a maximum of about 8 questions, and ideally, so we want a survey that can be completed within 3 or 4 minutes. If you're going to have long surveys, you're going to have 2 results of that. First of all, you're going to have a higher dropout rate in people completing the surveys. And if people do these surveys, they're less likely to do, if they do complete one of your longer surveys, they're less likely to complete surveys in the future just due to the length of them. So yeah, keep the surveys short. Also key, as I mentioned before, is to provide feedback of your results back to the panel. And those live reports are a really good example as well. And generally, when we're providing the live results of data back through to our respondents, it's generally the quantitative results. So we're eliminating the qualitative responses from the survey results, and that means we don't have to worry about moderation of those particular responses. And as long as we just focus on those closed-ended questions. You can also consider other ways to engage with the panel. So, for an example of what we've done with Thomasinall City Council is we've actually had face-to-face meetings with that panel as well. So there's an opportunity for panel members to get together, share their experiences about being on the panel, and also there was an opportunity at that stage to meet with councillors and elected officials. You should also consider incentives. We do run panels where there's no incentives involved, and in fact, that may have a slight effect on your response rates, but we still generally have high response rates to those surveys as well. In terms of what you can do with your panel, it really is up to your imagination. So there's the sort of the standard consultation processes that a lot of councils go through. That could be 10-year plans, annual plans, and then as that list, as you can now see, it shows a whole range of surveys. It could be around liquor bans, city events, sustainability. More interesting surveys that aren't on that list that they've done recently about fluoridation in the water, making the city a healthier place, facilities, and also often these surveys, the panel's being used as a satisfaction survey tool as well. So traditionally within New Zealand, there was a few services that were available to councils for, which was done by telephone polling. These were surveys that would be run on an annual basis, and would rate the satisfaction that community members had with the services that the council was providing. More and more we find that we're working with councils and they're using their panels to actually measure resident satisfaction as well. So that pretty much covers off the sort of the key areas of what I wanted to cover off today. So we've looked at the what a panel is, why our council clients use the panel, and some good tips in terms of how to run a successful panel and what you can do with your panel. So I'm just going to look through any questions there that have come through, Joanne, while I've been talking.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. I'll just stop you presenting and we'll go in and have a look at some questions. So there are a couple of questions here. So I'll start with Jason's question because I also know Jason needs to leave shortly. Jason said, he has hard to reach people in his area, often disenfranchised groups, culturally and linguistically diverse, etc. How do you tailor to make sure you get those demographic representatives and make sure there's access and equity there?
Yeah, sure. So we've, likewise, we have a diverse,
Sorry, just 1 second. Could you stop sharing your screen?
Because
we can still see the screen share. We like seeing your face now. Yep, there we go. We have you.
Great. So in that question, so likewise, I mean, I'll use our local Lower Hutt City Council where I actually live, and we also just recently built their panel, and they were really keen on having a panel which was quite diverse as well. So that really goes down to the street recruitment. So we went out into particular street fairs and festivals where particular ethnic groups were, I mean, they were basically ethnic fairs, and we were talking to them, and we got a high uptake there. So, I mean, essentially you do need to have an email address. So it immediately eliminates anyone that doesn't have an email address. But I'm not sure what, I mean, internet penetration within New Zealand's really high. I think last time I looked at it, 92%. And with the advent or the proliferation of smartphones, we find that generally we've got no issues in targeting those particular groups. In terms of disenfranchised, I guess there is a segment of the community that we still find that just aren't interested in what council is doing whatsoever. So it's probably not going to be a silver bullet for that in that sense. So it's not unlikely to be, because there's still the option of not doing the surveys. But the key message that we're trying to send, or when I'm talking to councils about why they'd have a panel, is it just makes it so much easier. And just creating the ease of use helps remove some of those barriers to participation.
Sure. So when you were talking about emails, this is sort of a quick add-on to that, I guess, from my perspective or my question. I believe people who have Facebook now can also just have a default email address from Facebook. Do you sort of get a lot of young people that way, or do you use their Facebook email addresses?
Gosh, no, generally most people use it. I mean, if I look at the younger demographics, they might be through their university. I've still got lots of university type addresses, but generally it's Gmail. And then you've got standard email addresses there. I haven't actually seen a Facebook address.
There you go. We have a question here as well from Carol, which I'm just broadcasting, and she's saying, oh, sorry, I didn't broadcast it properly. So Carol's saying ratepayers and residents need to have confidence that their concerns and opinions will be taken into consideration, and standard tick the box consultation in the past hasn't engendered confidence in public consultation. So can you sort of explain why sort of why Public Voice's approach manages to address that issue of people not having confidence that they'll be listened to? Like, do you give feedback to them, for example, about how their comments are taken into consideration by the council, or, you know, letters to say thanks with listening or anything like that?
Yeah, so often that's done. So feedback and results, and also what council has done. So that's really important, and it just creates a dialogue. So it helps in those processes as well. So having that communication, the regular emails helps, an update on what's going on. And then if we look at what was happening prior to that, it's certainly an improvement, and it creates an awareness, or a greater awareness, within the members of the panel on the activities of what the council is up to. Because if we look at what was happening, I mean, for instance, we've often done surveys, and at the end of the surveys process, a question will be along the lines of, have you ever submitted have you ever participated in a consultation process before? By and large, every time we ask that question, the answer is no. So we're still dealing with a segment or a group of the community who just haven't participated in the standard or all those formal consultation processes. So it does enable council to hear from those people that they wouldn't generally hear from. Now, in regards to what council does with that, I mean, that's really up to the council themselves.
Yep, okay. But it sounds like, Carol, if that didn't answer your question, or if you want to add a little bit more to your comment, please do so, and we'll make sure we continue with it. I have a comment here as well from Janelle, and she says that running surveys can be great for top-of-mind responses, but they've found that even if you make information available beforehand, people don't tend to read it before they sort of put their comments in. And how does the panels sort of do you know what I mean? How do the panels then get some deliberative discussion and engagement rather than just surveys around issues?
So I guess, that's a good question, and I think that was an example that we used with Hastings District Council. So you're right, a survey, it's quick and easy to complete, but there's no requirement for a survey respondent to read all the material. But I also think by and large, there's probably a lack of a willingness or an interest on many of the respondents, to have to wade through a large amount of information. What we generally do with our surveys is we provide a little bit of information, so a little brief in terms of what's going on. We also provide a link to the full documentation as well. So these sort of degrees or segments of information that's available to the potential respondent. But I mean, with that example, I talked about Hastings District Councils at the end of completing their survey, if their interest has been sparked and they'd like to talk about it or turn into that deliberative process, there is that option as well. And I think a small percentage or a percentage of those respondents will follow through on that, but the majority of people won't.
So this is, I guess, sort of a question that leads on or sort of connected to Janelle's question, I guess, and that's about what's the difference between a citizens panel and a citizens jury? Like where's the deliberative line and other differences between the two?
We generally don't do any deliberation within the citizens panel. I think that probably the key thing is that deliberation. So if you look at a citizens jury, I mean, and that's really deliberative focused, and first of all, it's smaller. So a citizens jury is more of a focus group. So I guess a lot of these techniques or methodologies that we use, are purely borrowed from market research. So a citizens jury is not really dissimilar to what you'd call a market research focus group, and a citizens panel is not dissimilar to what you'd have within a corporate environment, whether it be a consumer panel or a customer panel as well. It's just it is just a different focus. So I guess, and if you look at it from a market research point of view, that citizens jury is going to be really heavily focused on the qualitative end of the spectrum in terms of the results and what you're going to get through, compared to the panel, which is more quantitative focused. But what we do with we often have open-ended questions or qualitative questions in our surveys as well, and we generally theme and we do additional analysis on that so they can be reported on. So, for instance, you have a question within a survey. What else would you like to? Do you have any other comments? And then we'll have one of our analysts that will go through that and pick up what the key themes are. Or, for instance, what comes top of mind is we had a smoking survey recently. What areas? We had a list of areas which considered should be smoke-free, but then we have an open text box at the end which says, what other areas do you think should be smoke-free? And we just have an analyst that will go through that, identify the key themes, and reports back through on that. So I think that's probably the key area, or the key difference between a citizens jury and a citizens panel.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's because we started late, but we don't seem to have any other questions coming through. So I might ask one more question of my own, just to give people a chance if they have sort of been holding back because they knew other questions were coming in. And so I guess what my question is, it really relates to that topic while I just wait to see if anyone else has anything to add. And that question, Jared, is really about, is there a limit to the number of people that you can have on a panel, or would you recommend a limit to the number of people that you should have on a panel, or would it be great to have everyone in the whole city sort of signed up?
Yeah, well, I think that the ability does exist for everyone to be on there, and so the only thing that doesn't give you, the bigger the panel, the better, I say. And I think a good example is Auckland City Council. They run their own panel, and last time I checked, or last time I heard, they had around 20,000 people on there. And so what that size gives them is a greater breadth or a greater depth in terms of representation. And so if they wanted to target a smaller sample or a segment of that panel, then they're able to, because just by bare benefit of the large numbers that they have. So effectively, the way that technology works is that, the bigger the better.
Yeah, fantastic. So in the meantime, we have had a question come in from David, which I think is really great, and we'll add that in. So David asks, do you have an issue with multiple responses from a single elector, interest/lobby group?
No, not at all. That still happens, but it's not an issue because we're able to track where all our responses are coming from. So good examples, we've just run a survey recently, which was along health in the city. And one of the panel members actually shared the survey link onto their Facebook page, and that then meant we're getting a whole bunch of responses coming through from Facebook. Although, because we're able to track that, we can just allot them or categorize them into a certain position, so they can all just go back into the self-selected sample, even though the individual who posted that particular link came through from the randomly selected sample. We could then attribute all the other responses that came through via Facebook to the self-selected sample. At the end of the day, it didn't really affect the responses whatsoever in terms of the self-selected sample versus the randomly selected sample. But the technology that we use enables us to track that, and I guess mitigate any issues associated with it.
So I guess both the link and the IP address would be helping you get a sense of whether or not it was the same person.
Pretty much, and just the fact that they're and it's also a duplicate response as well. So we tie it back to a contact or an individual, and then but the IP address plus the referring link is both captured by the system, and that just raises the alarm bells and go, okay, well, let's categorize these responses slightly different. So they're still put into the mix. They're just reported on differently.
Sure. So we just lost a gentleman called Jason. He said thank you, but he had to go, and so that's a bit of a pity. So, but I do know that we did start late, so I'm sorry to people about that. Are there any last questions that we have from anyone? Not at this point. So what I might do is I'll just tell people what's happening for the next webinar series. But before I do that, I'll just give you a chance to maybe add anything that you wanted to say listening to those discussions, Jared, or?
Nothing comes to mind, Joanne. I think we've covered off everything that I wanted to say, and there's some good questions there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So for people who are watching these webinars regularly, I just thought I would let you know that the next webinar that we have is specifically not about technology and democracy, which I know is very unusual for this webinar series, but it relates to it because it's actually about how you choose the type of questions that you ask. So if we were to think about, say, for example, Jared's work with PublicVoice, it would be about how to choose questions that would get the sorts of responses that would help our council move forward. So there's a technique called appreciative inquiry, which is really well known for people in the community engagement fields. And Martin Bass, who's a lecturer at the School of Local Governments from the University of Technology in Sydney, has been one of the major sort of trainers and presenters in this, in New South Wales at least, and certainly as New South Wales councils went through massive changes in the last little while, Martin's been out doing a lot of that training. But appreciative inquiry is much broader than that, and it's about creating questions that help people move forward. So that will be the next webinar. As always, these webinars will be recorded. They'll be placed up on YouTube. Once Jared's happy with this webinar, we'll put it up on the 4devolution.info website and link it back to the YouTube account. If there's any specific links or information that you would like me to add to that page, so for example, I'll make sure I add PublicVoice's information. And Jared, I think with your slides, you didn't actually present the last slide, which was your contact details on your webinar. So yeah, so I might actually finish with that and then come back to this. It looks like we haven't had any other questions, so I'll just finish and I'll give you a chance to share that last page yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So you'll just need to do the screen share, I guess. Magic.
Here we are. It's my contact details.
And is there anything specific, Jared, that you would recommend to people? Like, is it best just to contact you via email? Because obviously that phone and mobile are New Zealand based, and most of the people watching this are from Australia. Yeah,
flick us an email or drop us a line.
And is it what's the extension for New Zealand from Australia? Do you know?
Yeah, 0064, isn't it?
Okay, yeah. 0064. Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you to everyone who's been on this call, and there's been some really great questions there. And as I said, we'll be looking forward to seeing you on the next webinar. And I look forward to talking to you then. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to contact Jared or I if you have any questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks,
Bye.
Joanne.